Hi, welcome back. I so appreciate your staying with this ever-deepening process. And we're building on our last guided meditation to Source Life, the 23rd meditation, and now we're going into the 24th meditation and hope to pull several of these powerful themes together with you. And you've been great in terms of experimenting in the last 2 or 3 meditations. I've asked you to join me in experimenting with moving from the language we speak, whatever it is, from the words, single bracket words that are familiar with to us, to open them up into their double bracket matrix, the double bracket meaning for all of the words, every word in our life, in our culture, in our experience that we're familiar with, which is a single bracket in this matrix of information, the it box. This is the it space, and this is the I thou sacred space where you can't objectify. Everything here is made into an it, an object, an entity, a content, a word, a sign, a phenomenon, an event, whatever it is. It becomes an object, a feeling. It's all objectified in this space. And all of our language in this matrix, which we're calling out with a single bracket word, you've been experimenting with going from any word in the single bracket to the double bracket deeper matrix of source language. And really one of the most striking points we've been looking at, which has not been seen this clearly before in source medicine, when you get into the source science, the Unum Science, and realize that reality, being, truly is an infinite field of fractal connectivity where everything is interconnecting and touching. And when we enter into that matrix, double bracket covenant or code of the source, then we experience that immersion in the zone, in the zen, in the flow, and experience a deep interwovenness with a field of ever-shifting, growing, moving, living, dying reality. And that's when we touch the source of life. And that's been our journey. And there's a language, a matrix. The double bracket matrix is the source language that has been peeking out over the last 3,000 years, but we needed to get the code in order to access it, as we would with any. Just as we had to get the digital computer code to get computers, we need to get the source code to enter into more fully into a sustained life in the zone. And that's where we get the deeper literacy, the missing literacy that has been emerging over the past 3,000 years. And this hologram, visual, meditative hologram, is attempting to it gets messy as we see, but we're trying to see life here, and the symptoms and all the great things and the breakthroughs that we experience here, which is great in the information space, which we can Google, so to speak, as a metaphor. You can Google it, and we suggested that the information age using this matrix is millennial, 2,500 years, let's say. We've been in the information age, which is talk about it. Language, thought, experience, telling stories, narratives about ourselves, and that's our culture, and scientific narratives about the world, artistic objects that we created. And this is all the it space. And our teachers who are seeking to call us to the deeper, the journey into the deeper space, the unum, the infinite unum pluribus, where the universe is experienced at the ground level, the source, as the being, the field of reality is when we're in the flow. And that's a double bracket matrix. So that's a source of language. And all that we know, all of our narratives, all of our worldviews, all of our scripture, everything that we have, all of our feelings, all of our thoughts, is going on in this technology. It's a technology that's vastly information-based, able to handle many different boundless narratives and worldviews and alternative stories and theoretical structures and logics are all going on here, including our computer age is here. And our teachers who are calling us to mature into the double bracket matrix, that's where we become whole beings, organic. And so we began to see in source medicine, this is ontology. Ontology, as we've seen, getting familiar with that word, is being, reality, source. And ontology, if we're cut off from our being, if we're cut off from the grammar, the code of being, which this matrix does block in some profound way by its very nature, then we're going to feel it in our lives at every moment. So the way we put that is that if you're in this matrix and you're swallowed by it and you're in it, even though you have access to the deeper space, as we've seen, then you're going to be desourced, which is what this line means. If you're desourced, cut off from being, from truth, from reality, from word, from the flow from God, whatever name we use for this, then you're going to show the signs and symptoms, and that is medical ontology. So being desourced is a very serious medical condition. And it has not been realized because we haven't seen source science, medical ontology, from the source. And looking deeply into where we are, swallowed within this single bracket matrix of powerful word processing and information and our rational lives, in that narrative lives in that space, and we haven't been able to see it because you can't. It makes us able to see within that space, and we aren't able to see it while we're in it. So we have to step back, and that's what our great teachers have been urging us for centuries, for millennia, to step out, let it go deeper, rise, awaken, wisdom, enlightenment, the Christ space, the Buddha space, and we've said this over and over. So this is just a warm up to really go for it. Now, so if you are cut off from being, you're going to suffer. And we've been saying, let's look again more deeply then at when we're in that matrix, a single bracket matrix, and we couldn't see the symptoms really fully in their depth of fear of death, facing death, for example, feeling the loss of meaning, wondering what's the point, feeling ungrounded, feeling unsafe, feeling insecure, existentially insecure because I'm free floating here because you're not grounded here. You're sustained by your narrative and your story and your perspective. But it's not grounded in reality. If you're cut off from being grounded in reality, you're going to feel the ungroundedness of your life. So in the last two meditations, it's been going back from the very start, that if you're desourced, you're going to have symptoms, medical, ontological, medical symptoms of a kind of suffering, ontological suffering, when you're cut off from yourself, because our self is a source being, a full human. That's the source, that's a self. And when we're in the matrix, we're cut off from ourselves, and we're going to feel that. And we're going to be seeking it in all kinds of ways. So we know it, because it's in us. The double bracket is in us. It's the infinite force calling on us. We've seen that. We're living under the influence of the call of being, of reality, to come to deeper, intimate encounter with reality, which is our journey as rational beings, logo sapiens. So if that's eclipsed or alienated or blocked or repressed or suppressed, whatever, we're going to feel it. And we're going to, our lives in this space, we've seen, are going to show symptoms of being cut off from being. And so we really need to take a deeper medical look at the many symptoms of an everyday person living in the world in this space. And not yet knowing that we're ungrounded. Once we see we're desourced, and that's really generating medically the symptoms we're suffering from. Why we become the kind of consumers and user of resources to the extent that we are in an affluent society, for example. What are we trying to fill? Why the addictions? Why the seeking to medicate something that's missing, to fill the void, to acquire, to addictively go after whatever it is we feel and identify and misdiagnose what we think is going to satisfy the deep existential absence of ourself, of our being, seeking it in desperate ways, seeking this life source here. It's a kind of pathetic situation medically. And so our whole culture can be in malpractice. If we're cut off from our source being, if we're desourced, we're in malpractice, ontological malpractice. Everyone. Because we don't sign on officially to the matrix that we're born into. The language, the culture, we're coded. And all that we learn in our education and parenting is within this matrix of the language we know and have. And it's powerful. So as we learn our language and our culture, we're getting coded. And when we're coded with the single bracket matrix, it intrinsically cuts us off from access to crossing into the deeper space of tapping the self, our deeper source self, and to mature as Logos Sapiens in the power of reason, thought, meaning, truth, ethics, goodness, all of that. That's a double bracket space that our teachers have been urging us to help deal with our medical suffering from being cut off. So that in a way sums up one of the main themes in our journey into source life. That if we're de-sourced, we're medically in malpractice, all of us, and we therefore can't have the tools to adequately diagnose what is it missing in my life, what is going to make me happy, what's going to give me well-being, how can I get real deep satisfaction in my life, how can I find peace. So the quest for inner peace and stillness and wholeness, right? Whatever it is, to feel love and to feel connected with nature, with each other, and to flow in non-violence, to end the violence, where we slash each other and we don't realize that the matrix that we're living in that makes everything into an object, and we make ourselves and manufacture ourselves in that covenant, in that code, the I-it code. We objectify and make things into objects and entities and beings. And our great teachers saw we're not objects, we're not entities, we're not beings. To enter being, to become a person, a mensch, is to step into the zone, outside of that box. We're not it, we're thou. We're sacred beings. And so that is a life and death matter. So our whole culture can be in malpractice. Many different cultures. Our religious life can be in malpractice if we're seeking to conduct a religious life in this space. That's a very serious thing to say. If we're seeking God in this space, but God is here, the infinite is here, we can't download it. And if we do, then we're cutting ourselves off from the word of source, from the script of reality, from the DNA of reality, which is deep ontology. So what I'd like to do is, in this moment, is what we've been suggesting, is that once we realize that being de-sourced is a serious, deep, urgent medical condition in medical ontology, and we need to diagnose it more deeply. Because if we're addicted to certain things and trying to fill the void of being de-sourced within this space, it's not going to work. So the lesson of 2,500 years of brilliant humans, which we are, seeking to solve our problems and medicate them and deal with them here, when the only way to do it is to call this out, to see that the deepest matrix that's implanted within us, the mind operating process, the program that generates all kinds of thought forms and languages and narratives and worldviews and paradigms that still hold us captive in this space, we've got to see it, call it out, and rise into a deeper, awakened, free-range, open life. This is where human freedom is. This is where we're caged. This is it. This is I-thou. When we cross into the double bracket space, we're entered into the sacred space of tapping the zone and tapping ourselves. And to get that code, we have to learn how to say I am. When we say I am, we are amming. We're not talking about it. We're not making it an it. We're surfing the source. We're directly surfing reality. And that is really the challenge. And why has it been so difficult for centuries, millennia, despite the teachers and scriptures that have been calling us to make this crossing? Why do we hit that wall? Why do we hit this wall and get caught? And we practice downloading rather than upscripting ourselves into that space. Well, there are many reasons, and our teachers have known it. Because the crossing from here into the infinite connection is a major shift in the mind operating process to go from the finite. Everything here is an it, and it's made finite. If we put God here, as we saw, we make God, the infinite, into finite. So how do we cross into the open space and open ourselves? Because ourself is connected with the entire field. It's not that we are God. It's not that we are infinite, but we are infinitely interconnected. We're fractal humans. We're connected, and it's ever deepening. To learn how to be finite here, which is the art of being a human. It's not that you don't become God. You don't become the infinite, but you come into intimacy with the infinite. And that's where you enter into the fractal flow, the Zen flow of mindfulness. So when we get the Zen code, the Christ code, the Buddha code, the Moses code, the God code, the yoga code, the Tao code, to mention a few. When we get that code, we know how to surf, we know how to dialogue, dialogos. We're dialogue beings. And we live, to be a human is the art of in deep dialogue, not monologue. Because we can't have dialogue in a monologue technology or matrix. We need to go into open I thou to get the dialogue flow, to access reality and life and all of the depth of the force of life and truth force that we long for here, because it's acting on us and calling us. So that is really the medical ontology diagnostic we've been suggesting, that once we opened up and discover source science, the missing first science, which has been emerging for over 3,000 years on the planet, we've got to get to first philosophy, first science. The queen of all the sciences, the language of being, the DNA for being, the double helix of being. Ontology is the deepest science of all. So psychology, biology, physics, all are derivative sciences. Ontology, ontos, is the science of all sciences. So once we have deep ontology with a code of I am, and we can't access it from a theoretical structure outside, you've got to go into it and I am it. And what we discover this being is an infinite flow of I am, of awareing. Because on the ground floor, infinite being is infinitely conscious. How much infinite consciousness? What is that infinite awareness? Which means what? All matter, all life, all universe is filled with that flow. That's the secret of the unum pluribus infinite being of reality. And that's what we get in deep science, source science. So part of the great challenge for humans living in this cultural space is we're terrified of the double bracket space, because it seems to require us to let go of our story. So there are deep existential phobias of the self here trying to face its higher self. The self here, which is here, is, even though our higher self is always around us, and that's one of the scientific source science Unum principles that we've seen, that every X is X. The double bracket is funding and making possible any sign, any narrative, any script, any event, any breath we take. Whatever we have, it's being funded by the double bracket and is right there. And the science is that the infinite cannot be pushed away. It's in every morsel, in every grain of sand, in every grain of human, in every breath, in every cell. We can't push the infinite away. It's calling us, it's holding us, it's sustaining us, and yet we displace it with an immature form of information technology. As great as it is, the Google age, 2,500 years and more of information, and we're trying to solve our problems, and we don't realize that that information is blocking us from a deeper, and it's a disinformation from upgrading to a higher level. So part of the fear and phobia of making the crossing from the finite, enclosed, caged, colonized space into the open, liberated, freedom space of the freedom of being, the freedom of thought, the freedom of speech, the flow of life, the freedom of love, all of that is going on here. And that double bracket open range can be terrifying to the single bracket person. So there's a deep phobia of yourself. The self is terrified to face itself. It's deep double. The single bracket self is afraid, ontologically afraid of the double bracket, because it means you've got to do something deep. You've got to let go of privileging your single bracket comfort zone and adolescent stage of mind and word and rational cognitive development in the box, as great as it is. Like a caterpillar has to become a butterfly, or an ego pillar has to become a Buddha fly. We can play with that, right? It's terrifying. Because to go into the free range space, to go into the Buddha space, the Christ space, the yoga space, if we really understood the depth of yoga, the Om space, we've got to make a deep shift from the finite life to the transfinite life. And that's terrifying. And what I'd like to help us see as we're coaching in this is that we don't have to give up information to go into the higher. When you drop the single bracket cage and open up into the double bracket range of yourself, you're not giving up who you are, you're gaining who you are. You're not giving up your family, you're gaining your family. You're not giving up your lover, you're gaining your lover. And that's what people don't understand. When when you let go of a single bracket matrix that's holding us captive and we go into the deeper space of who we are, it's terrifying because it feels like a death. And in a way it is, to let go of having the single bracket matrix dominate who we are. So that to let go. So what I'd like to do is to turn the page and go deeper on this. So let's take a pause for a moment. That visual, meditative visual can get so complex. So let's resume. We took a pause for a moment to turn the page as we continue our 24th guided meditation. And we left off a moment ago on the note of why it is so terrifying to face being, to face the source. And our great teachers knew that we've got to develop the capacity to open up to that deep space. And I've turned the page in order to remind us of the journey, the stages of the journey, but with our meditative visual, to help us understand the deep challenge and also the joy and excitement of going from a single bracket life to a double bracket life, personally, interpersonally, and for our culture and our different cultures and religions across the planet, our human family, to move from a single bracket matrix to a double bracket matrix, as terrifying as it can be, that it is really the key to our survival and thrival on the planet in this 21st century. And it's an amazing time to be alive, and to get the source science and to get the source code and realize, just as getting the digital code, we could have computers, or the age of computers and the internet and all of that done, to get the source code for entering and tapping the I am space and the literacy, and to sustain that as a level of culture and culture making for individuals and all humanity. It's teachable, it's learnable, it's our birthright. It's exciting, but it's terrifying. And when we turned the page a moment ago, it's terrifying because it's clear that to make the crossing from a single bracket matrix to a double bracket life matrix, to the higher integral holistic source matrix, is going from a more comfortable finite space to a transfinite crossing. That's why it's so challenging, and has been, to make that crossing. Why are we afraid? Because it feels like a death. And we've heard that theme echoed by our great pioneer, source pioneers. Jesus, for example, unless you die, you can't be born again. Right? You've got to, Krishna is teaching and coaching Arjuna, the warrior, who is broken down in the life crisis because he's living a smotherboard life. He's living in the single bracket matrix and doesn't realize it's led to a fratricidal war and the breakdown of his ethics and his life and his meaning, and he drops his weapon. And Krishna is coaching him to give him the yoga technology to go into the source, into the Om space, to become a mensch, a human, to become truly Arjuna, to let go of single bracket Arjuna. Somehow you've got to sacrifice. The word sacrifice keeps coming up over and over for Abraham, for Jesus, for Muhammad. Surrender to Allah. You've got to sacrifice something. So the rite of passage from single bracket to double bracket is enormous, as it should be. To go from unbeing, desourced, to sourced, to go from when you're saying I am, which is you are not, to I am when you are, to tap being and make that rite of passage is a monumental moment, personally for individuals as well as for culture as a whole, to upgrade and upscript. So really what I'd like to focus on now, as we kind of deepen a visual together, to try and just see the layers to help us get this, why the rite of passage from single bracket to double bracket has been so difficult. And for Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, for those who have read it, that you see that Arjuna was fighting Krishna in chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4, all these meditative moments in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna was, as a good student, as a healthy student, was questioning and complaining and resisting Krishna's coaching, and Krishna remained patient and kept teaching him literacy, to give him the Om code so that he can really begin now to dilate his mind. And so in chapter 11, by the time we reach chapter 11, and deep layers of meditation, which is, in a way, the journey we've been on, to go from the evolution of human life and consciousness over 3,000 years to this threshold of crossing into the zone, into the source. Unum space, the Om space, in this language. Krishna says in a very intimate moment with Arjuna that you know, as his protege at that moment, because he's been building up the infrastructure to be able to handle the light of Om. This theme is echoed all through the great tradition. With Socrates, to leave the cave where we're living, in the cave life, and coming into the light of Logos, it can blind you. When you step into the light of enlightenment, into the Logos, into the source, into the Om, into the Christ, you've got to be prepared. You speak of Kundalini shock, spiritual shock, for example, right? The mind that is used to the single bracket matrix, you can't suddenly just jump into the double bracket. Our great teachers knew that. We have to prepare ourselves to make the crossing and to sustain it. It's high voltage, and we need to really do it in a responsible way to make the crossing. In the Buddhist tradition, one of our great geniuses, Nagarjuna, says that you don't play around with the source. Like a serpent wrongly grasped, it's dangerous, so be careful. Krishna says to Arjuna early in the journey, in chapter 3, you're just a little, Arjuna, don't be afraid. Just a little bit of faith in yourself, really. And trust that yourself is there. Your double bracket self is right there, holding you all the time. And to have faith and confidence, self-confidence is fide, is belief, and confide is just trust that yourself, your high self, being is holding you. The infinite source is holding you. Trust that, and you'll make the rite of passage from the finite to the transfinite. So in that area, when chapter 11, by then Arjuna was ready to open the third eye, which is a metaphor. It's really the first eye. It's the mind opens and dilates, and now he's ready to see the unified field, to experience it firsthand, the I am space, the Om space. And it's very beautiful in chapter 11. If you ever read the Bhagavad Gita, in the dialogue between Krishna, the Om voice, the double bracket voice, speaking to Arjuna and giving him the steps, the infrastructure to get the Microsoft for the mind. That's what I call the double brackets. It's like the Microsoft for the mind, for consciousness, for language, for word, for reality. And now we can open up the age of awakened culture. And that's our birthright for all of us, individually and collectively. So when the third eye opens, so to speak, when you open the third eye, the crown chakra, to use that language, right? But you could say when one becomes enlightened, when Buddha becomes enlightened, the first eye opens. When one leaves the cave and enters rational awakening, rational light opens up. And with the source code, we are able to handle and sustain it and stay in the deep dialogue space and live a dialogue life, the dance of dialogue and interconnectivity in the first person. We can live a primary life when we tap our primary being. So that is the call to nirvana. That's the call when we say the kingdom of God is at hand, the double brackets is at hand. And that's no metaphor. It's really, literally, throughout, right here. Nirvana is right here. So what I'd like to do in going for a moment into how do we humans, even though we're afraid, there's a phobia of the source. Okay, that sums it up. Not only of the self, it's not only where I have autophobia, the phobia of the self, because it means I've got to somehow question everything that's familiar and all that I know and the foundation of my life as I know it. All of my identity, all of my stuff, all of everything that's familiar, all of my meaning. Do I have to give that up? And it sounds like a death. So it looks like the rite of passage from the finite caged life to the transfinite open range of dialogue, from monologue to dialogue, feels like a kind of dying. And that's the word sacrifice is being used, all of it through our great pioneers, opening up the source transition, the rite of passage. So something has to sacrifice. What does it mean? You've got to let go of what's familiar. that the adolescent state, give up your matrix. It's never been said this way exactly. It's often said, you have to stop that desiring. You've got to give up your ego. That kind of talk, it doesn't ring true. It doesn't sound right. Because the ego and desire is all an effect of the single bracket matrix. What we should hear in our great teaching, we've got to question privileging being stuck and lodged within the single bracket matrix. That's how I would rephrase from the point of view of source deep ontology, from Unum Science. A more powerful, accessible, user-friendly way to help us, coach us to see how do you move from single bracket to double bracket. It's that we don't give up who we are, we gain who we are. It sounds as if I have to give up my ego, I'm going to die. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to resist that. And that's the phobia. It sounds like that. But that's not the best way to say it with source science. It is that don't remain stuck in an adolescent matrix and thought form and program and mind program and life program. Dare to step back and step out of it and move deeper and open it up into a more powerful matrix, a source matrix, a double bracket matrix, where everything that was around you in your life just blossoms into. That's what we've been rehearsing together in the last 2 or 3 meditations, when I said, every word that's familiar to you, try to get the double bracket. Go from English to Zenglish. If you speak French, you've got to learn Zenglish. If you're German, Hebrew, Swahili, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Hindi, whatever language you speak, you've got to learn Zenglish. Take the words of your language and upgrade them to a higher level. You don't lose your language, you gain it in a deeper, more powerful way. So if you go from English to Zenglish, English blossoms into High English, Source English. When we get the double bracket matrix, or syntax, or grammar, or DNA, or language, that's why we call it a code. The double bracket is a code. It's a language. It's a grammar. It's a source grammar. The Logos code. The code of Logos. So let's play for a moment and look at different stages of going. Let's start at the bottom in this space. Here we are. We turn the page. And we're going to wrap this up soon, but I just wanted to show the main point we're focusing on is what's so challenging in the rite of passage from a single bracket culture and life and narrative and story about ourselves to somehow step back from that and open up and cross into the zone, into the deeper space, which feels like a death, but it really is birthing. It's coming to life. It's gaining everything. It's gaining the earth. It's gaining nature. It's gaining our families, gaining our loved ones, gaining ourselves. Everything around us turns on into deeper double bracket fractal power. And we don't get that. That's why it's been so scary. So let's just look at stages in this space. We turn the page, and that's refreshing. And just pause a moment, because in a way, that's a clean slate. And because when we're raised in our culture, we're already implanted in the single bracket space. But we don't realize the vast presence of the infinite presence of being surrounds us. So this is a place of being. This is reality. This is the infinite being, because being is infinite. And God names have been given. With us, Yahweh, it's Allah, it's Om, it's Ta. We've seen this over and over because we want to name the infinite in whatever language we're approaching the infinite. But we're going into a deeper Unum Pluribus, the infinite being. We're opening up the language and its global power. So in this space, it's vastly open. And what I'd like to play with us in this meditation is visual, is to just go through some stages and somehow end up on the point that we've been working with and massaging about crossing from single bracket to double bracket. I would like to help us with source science, find a more user-friendly way to embrace it and see what a fantastic, hopeful, amazing moment it is to go from single bracket, not scary. It may appear scary, but I'm trying to help us open the first eye, which is here for us, and make a crossing that we've been called to make for centuries. So, stage one, I go to the bottom. I hope you can see this. We start out with the language we know. That's where we live. I hope you can see it. at the bottom here. This is where we, in our evolution, is we're going to go through a kind of a series of evolution to come to this point. And so here, this is where the language you speak, we've got word power, we've got the information. We've got the information code, the logos code for information. And we know how to describe the world and use language and have meaning and truth and make sentences and have experience. I mean, we now can use this to metabolize and make my world, name things and encounter others and self and nature and everything and feelings and emotions. Everything is going on here. And then when teachers are beginning to bring in talk of the infinite, we go into another stage where we still don't have single bracket, double brackets, but we download the infinite into our space. So this space, the same space, we say, well, there's a finite and the infinite, and we try to swallow the infinite. And that's where the single bracket downloads the infinite into that space. And we've seen that this is not a good idea. And in a way, that's where we are now. After all of these centuries of hearing the infinite word, all we know is how to take it down to our it box, the it space. This is the matrix. And there's a crossing in which we begin to see, and what we're suggesting in our journey together in the quest for source is this picture, in which the double brackets is always here, and the single brackets is being held and sourced by within the double brackets. So this picture is no, and this picture is yes. This took centuries, and this is what our main journey into source in these 24 meditations. What we've been seeking to do is to say, this hasn't worked, to download the infinite into our box, into our technology, this matrix. That picture is bankrupt. And this picture where, the single bracket is being funded by the double bracket space. The single bracket matrix is being held by the double bracket matrix. That is the correct realignment. That's like the chiropractic. You get realigned. It's not that this is first, but source is first. That's what this is saying. So every word we use here, every word, anything we say here, has two meanings. That's what's so confusing. That every word we spoke in our language here, any word we utter here, had a double resonance between, in the double bracket meaning, the matrix or the single bracket matrix. They're working there together. Either the double bracket matrix gets swallowed up inside the single bracket, in which destroys it. Because if you put the infinite in the single bracket space, it melts it away. If you put God in the box, it's not God. If you take Om in the box, it's not Om. But when you realize that it's the other way around, there's an inversion. This is huge. Going from this to this stage is huge, because you realize, that to enter in, when you realize that you are located within the double bracket space, that is an upgrade already. This is a revolutionary act to go from this picture to this. So we're saying yes to this one. Check mark. Okay? And let's go open it up further. It means that moving from this matrix to that matrix is the flow of human evolution. In a way, that's been another theme of what we've been suggesting all through these meditations. We must mature from this culture to this culture. We must, but even though they're very intimately related already, we're always in it. That's the point. That's what we're opening it up and disentangling what can be easily conflated in our minds. Right? What's the interface between the single bracket and double? What are these two matrices? And the enormous move from finite to transfinite, from finite here into the... So that if I'm looking at the self, if I look at I as we saw, I have a double life going on. The double bracket, the single bracket I is right there with the double bracket I. So I'm just using I. I'm just saying I, for example. Let's put I instead of X. We could put time, we could put space. And every word has two meanings in this matrix or that matrix. The two matrices are not broken apart. The double bracket is always there. In any single bracket word, the double bracket word is there too. So every word has a kind of matrix ambiguity. It has a double entendre between the single bracket and the double bracket. I am. So again, what I'm seeking to do in this meditative visual is to help us see how close our high self is and how close the matrix, the double bracket matrix, is right within the single bracket matrix. And yet, why is it so difficult, is what we're trying to see. So in a way, this picture is saying the human journey is going from here to mature from this matrix into that matrix. And the way to put this, as we've done here, is to say that any word is surrounded by the double brackets. And we've said this already, we're just putting this here again. So in other words, the journey from here to there is in a way this. I'm trying to capture this line. This to that is not going far away. It's stepping out of the way. It's somehow that. And doing this is scary. We have phobias about that. All of the talk of sacrifice or lose the ego or stop desiring. All of these coachings for centuries we've been hearing by the Buddha and by Krishna and the yoga philosophy, and so says you got to stop the ego. But the ego is a symptom of the single bracket space. What has to be faced is a matrix. The way I'm seeking with source science now to upgrade our wisdom teachings and enlightenment teachings of the ages is to say what we really need, what the Buddha is saying, existence is suffering, single bracket. It has a cause, medically, single bracket, addiction to that matrix. We have a choice, the third Buddha axiom. We don't have to stay here. We can go into the Buddha space. We can let it go and expand out. And so in a way, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is when you move from being dominated by the single bracket to open the third eye, open the first eye. When the first eye opens, you're now in the space, you're in the zone. And that's not going far away. That's not giving up who you are. Yes, you give up your ID here. But when you give this up, right, you're not killing it. You're opening it up to your ID, to yourself. So this gesture, this is what I'm suggesting. This might make it a little more user-friendly. It's not going, I'll just go back for a moment. Hold this for a moment. It's not going from life here, crossing over the barrier into life over there, as if it's far away. It's much more intimate and close. It's going from where I am to step out of my way, get out of your way. And then you realize you're already being held. That's what I'm trying to say is user-friendly. Your double bracket self, reality, being, the infinite, presence is all around us right now. And the call to enlightenment or wisdom or wholeness or realize yourself or manifest yourself, whatever language is being used by the great coaches who are seeking to get us to go into our primary being, our primary self, to know thyself, Socrates would say. This self that we have here with this matrix is blocking us from our self, which I'm trying to capture here when we step into the double bracket. When you say I am, I am. When you say I am and live it, to speak I am language, the language of I am, you don't have to utter it verbally, but to be I am. So when Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, or when Moses is asking God, whom shall I say? I am that I am. That I am is huge. It's a covenant. It's a code of mindfulness. It's the language, the grammar, the DNA of being. And it can be spoken in silence. Just my Buddha is silent, and you're speaking in your silence. That's deep speech. That's the living word. So, but when we go, and this is messy already. I'm just trying to help us disentangle what in the prior page. We're going to go back to the prior page, and I show you dreading it. But when we come to this stage here, that's what we're saying is the I and the other. Infinitely connected to the other. That's what we're saying. This, when you open this up, the I am, is infinitely connected to the world around. And that's where we're heading. That's the space of self-realization. In other words, the I is not separate and cut off. It's connected. The I cannot be broken from the other. Here, the other, the object in the box, is separate off. This is the I, it. But here, this is I, thou. This I am is I, thou. It means the I cannot be severed from the other. From the I and the other is, and that's the picture I'm trying to draw. So this moment in the meditative visuals is somehow the coaching of all of our great teachers, the rite of passage from the single bracket matrix to the double bracket matrix. And it has not been put in that language. And that makes it much more accessible in a way. You don't have to kill your ego or stop desire. You want to open up desire. You want to enter in what's desirable. In my single bracket life, I wanted money, I wanted attention, I wanted fame, I wanted celebrity, I wanted, that's desire. That's what I want. But the teachers know what ought you to want. How ought you to be, right? That's the ought, that's the ethics. How you ought to be, what is desirable, what's worthy of desire. So when you enter into the double bracket space, your whole psychology opens up. It's not that you don't desire in the ego monocentric way as you were in the it space, but when you enter the I thou space, compassion, passion, love, eros, sexuality, all of this opens up. It's not to kill that, it's to allow it to release into goodness, because when you're zoning in the I thou space, the ethic space, the I am, when you step back from privileging this down here, that's what this is. When you stop making that your whole world, and it's an adolescent stage, it's an important stage of maturation. To enter into the open space, you enter into dialogue, from monologue to dialogue. That's the I am space. In other words, the I am, is an I thou. Pause and think about that for a moment. That's huge. Because we tend to think of ourselves as isolated and separate. But what the great teachers saw is when Jesus, I am the truth, I am the life. Jesus, for example, in speaking the I am, and the science, the Christ science, is realizing we are connected. In the God space, we're connected. And that's ethics. When you realize I and the other are so intertwined in the double bracket matrix that we have to love one another. It's a love, the I thou is a love space. With nature, with others, with all others, other worlds, other cultures, other orientations. It's a love zone. Ethics is a love zone. And that's pure reason. Because reason is connectivity. And the double bracket is the code, the logos code of reason and enlightenment. And when we are in that I am awakened space, which is where our culture has to go to survive, that's when we dialogos, in deep dialogue, flow. And now we're zenning. And that's a peak performance. And that's where we have satisfaction. And just to be is fulfilling because it's boundlessly open. You don't need stuff. You don't need more money or more fame or more recognition or any. You don't need to fill the void of the single bracket self. It's boundless in how much it needs to accomplish this. When you question and call that out, you are. You've arrived. So that so-called enlightenment is not to get more. It's when you're zoning in your life, you are deeply satisfied because it's all interconnected in that moment. Double bracket, here now, I'm here now. So what I'm seeking to do in this meditation, the 24th meditation with you, is to help focus in on what has been a major feeling of a barrier to go from my basic everyday narrative space and my ID. I am my ID in the single bracket matrix. That's who I am. That's my story. It's my bio. It's my CV. That's who I am. Don't ask me to give that up. But the great teachers saw that single bracket matrix is adolescent ID. And the main point I'm trying to meditatively coach us together right now is it's user friendly to let it go, shed the skin, shed that matrix. It served us to a certain point, but you don't give up information. You don't have to throw out your computer. You don't have to throw out Google. You don't have to throw out the encyclopedia or Wikipedia or anypedia. You're now in the Akashic field. You don't have to throw out your house and your car and your kids and your significant others. When you do this, it may seem that way because you are your narrative. Back here, you are your narrative. So just hold this journey into the stages of this stage of 2,500 years of being, just to use an arbitrary figure, stuck in this matrix and then seeing, wow, this is a huge revolution to go from this to that. It's like going that the earth is the center of the sun. No, the sun is the center. Right? It's like the single bracket matrix is the center. No, the double bracket is the center. I'm going to do yoga. No, yoga is going to do you. It's a complete inversion that takes place when we realize that we're being held. So we'll end by going back to this messy picture. I hope the calligraphy may look chaotic, but I hope you're really getting more familiar in our meditation to simplify it and learn how to read it, because this is huge. If you remember, we're always in the zone. We're always in the infinite. We cannot not be. We can't be out here. I hope you do you see that? If you say, nice picture, but I'm over here, and I put myself outside of this, if you could pull that off, if you could step outside of the double brackets, you could outside of and other the infinite, you'd be more powerful than the infinite, because you would other it from the outside. And that's impossible. That's bad science. It's incoherent, it's incompetent. That's what the fall was. We can be as God. What is God? Self-sustaining. Right? Let's step outside. Let's leave Eden and go and find our own space. Let's find our own space outside of this God space, for example. Right? There's a kind of, don't eat that fruit. What is the fruit? The stuff here. The temptation was to predicate, to grow. This matrix cut us off. So the whole story of the fall in the biblical is eating this fruit. Not the fruit of wisdom, which is an I thou, but the fruit of knowledge in this space. So we have gained single bracket knowledge, but we lost wisdom. We lost enlightenment. We lost nirvana. We lost heaven. We lost Eden. We lost the bliss of solitude. Not solitude, but solitude. We went solo and fell into a break in our being, into aloneness and loneliness and isolation, and we couldn't find a relationship. And we want to get it back, and we're trying to solve the medical problem of being cut off from this matrix, and we haven't really seen, all our great teachings didn't really make it clear that it's the matrix that is holding us. And when we have detachment from this is not death. It feels like death, but it's not death. And that's really the main point of this meditation, is to show letting go of your matrix is like feeling like a dying. And the great teachers say you got to let it go and grow up to a higher matrix. And what I'm suggesting is when we do that, it feels as though I'm going to lose my ID. I'm going to lose my family. I've got to give up my daughter and my son and my lover. I've got to give up my profession. Whatever it is, I've got to give up my country. No, you have to give up an artificial story and ideology. A faulty narrative in the box that's being generated by the smother board. We've got to give up the smother board. And the rest opens up. So I'm trying to show that the rite of passage from single bracket matrix to the double bracket matrix, from monologue to dialogue, which we must do, it's life and death, because when we enter into the zone, we come to life. We come to maturity. I am myself. When you're amming, you're selfing, and you realize, you're self-realized, and that's when your being is satisfied, and that's well-being. That's ontological health in source medicine. It's when we come into our being, we come into fullness and love and relationships and connectivity and one with the field and one with reality. So we gain everything. So the ID here, your ID here is blossoming. Your ID here is stifled. And the rite of passage from this narrative and way of life, the I-it life into the I-thou life, right, is when everything opens up in the deepest possible way, and you're blissing. Because being is bliss. And being is being in love. And being in love is being in ethics. And loving yourself and others. And that's when we flourish and blossom. And all our great wisdom teachers and enlightenments are urging us to make that rite of passage. So that's one of the greatest points I really want to make with you now, is that I want to make it user-friendly. Our journey, these 24 meditations, we're going to take a break in a moment. These 24, and this is the 24th meditation, this journey that hopefully you've stayed all the way through and follow it, because it was meant to bring us to this point of celebration and joy, of bliss, of well-being. That's the health. That's ontological health. When we let go of the dominance and being colonized by the single bracket matrix into the double bracket source code, the covenant of Logos, of Logosophia, of all of our great teachers calling us to that matrix. That's when your true ID opens up. And everything around you opens up and flourishes. Your profession, you're a lawyer, be a lawyer. You're a teacher, be a teacher. You're an athlete, be an athlete. You're a lover, be a lover. Wherever it is, it goes deeper. And that's why we're practicing going from A to A. From whatever it is, I to I am. Because everything lights up in your true idea, in your true nature. When you tap primary being, source being, with a source code, that's when everything lights up. And that is the quest for youth and life. That is the quest for the code, is the quest for life, the quest for source, the quest for being, the quest for knowledge, the quest for ethics, the quest for beauty. It's all in that space. So let's pause and take a break. And I thank you very much for having the courage and stamina to stay through these 24 meditations. And we will continue, but this is a good place to pause and celebrate a rite of passage from monologue to dialogue, from I to I am, as we enter into the deep space. Thank you very much. We'll continue. There's so much more to go in depth, and we'll continue with 25 and beyond. But let's pause now and celebrate together. Thank you so much for staying with me.